So I recently started to use Netlify, which is a so-called application delivery network that sort of enables Jamstack style development, um, which I've used for some static site generation. But Netlify also makes available this concept of functions, which are actually built on top of Amazon's AWS Lambda functions. But Netlify takes care of packaging and deploying and serving those functions all behind an easy CLI and continuous integration workflow. So what I wanted to do was experiment with a way to select files, generate pre-signed URLs, and then have the user upload those files directly from the browser to Amazon S3 in an Angular application. So let's take a quick look. So here's my file input, and I'm going to choose a file. Now when I choose this file, we're going to see a flurry of activity, which is the browser calling the Netlify function locally, generating the signed URLs, then posting to the URLs generated by the Netlify function. Here we go. So what we can see is that locally I'm doing an options request because I'm calling across origins. Here I'm serving locally at one port, and then the function is being hosted locally at a different port. So it's generating that pre-signed URL, and if we look at the network activity here, what we can see is that we're posting over the file name of the chosen file and the MIME type to the Netlify function, get signed URLs, which is then returning a get URL and a put URL. The put URL is going to be used to upload the file directly to Amazon S3 from the browser, and then the get URL is going to be made available to share that S3 link with other users. And we can see that in fact, followed by the sign URLs, we're getting another options request. Let's see, where can I show that a little bit better? We're getting an options request, the pre-flight cross-origin check for Amazon, and then we are getting a put request to that pre-signed URL which was generated by the Netlify function. Now, pre-signed URLs have to be securely generated using a secret key, and we don't want to expose the secret key to the repository or the code base or to the front-end user, so we're going to encapsulate the secret key inside of the Netlify function using the .env npm module, which will then be used as build environment variables in production. And ultimately what happens here is this link gets generated, and you can see that when I click on it, I get a pre-signed URL for a GET request to that file. And here's my little Lucy Goose in her duck costume. So let's just take a quick look at how that works. So locally, I have my get signed URLs Netlify function. Now I'm using, like I said, the .env npm module to create a stopgap between the build environmental variables in production and the local context, which doesn't have build environmental variables, but we'll be pulling the env files out of the .env folder or file using the .env function. Now what you'll see is that I can then access my access key and secret key on the process.env thanks to the .env module, which becomes a no-op or no operation in the production build. I'm instantiating my S3 client, and then I'm defining my handler, which is what Netlify will encapsulate and proxy when deploying either locally or to Amazon's AWS Lambda functions. And here I'm dealing with some cross-origin stuff, again, because it has to call across origins locally. In production, it doesn't actually have to call across origins, but locally it does. I'm then parsing the body. I'm generating the Amazon S3 resource key based on the file name and a QID value. I'm then getting my put params and my get params. These are to generate the two signed URLs, one for put, one for get. You'll see that the put is only available for 2 minutes, after which it becomes unavailable. And the get is only available for 60 minutes, after which the get URL is also no longer available. I'm then using the Amazon AWS SDK to generate those signed URLs, which I'm then returning, which is of course what we saw here in the network request. Right, we're seeing that get URL and that put URL being returned by the Netlify function, which is actually an AWS function in production, but locally is just kind of a mock proxy that Netlify's CLI provides for us. Now, none of the code here is intended to be best practices. This is literally just what I could quote-unquote get working. There's really no error handling here, so take it with a grain of salt. Now, this is the Netlify function. We have to now access this in the Angular code. Now the Angular code is going to need access to the URL at which the Netlify function exists, because locally you'll see that the Netlify function exists at this 9000 port get signed URLs. In production, however, it's actually being done as a proxied subfolder to my Netlify site, so I don't actually know the location ahead of time, or I should say that I don't want to hard code that location into my source code because it won't work locally. So instead, what I'm going to do is use an environmental variable and then make that available to my code using my Webpack configuration. So let's open the Webpack configuration. Again, we're going to use the .env module to load that Netlify functions root value from an environmental variable. I'm then going to use the Webpack define plugin to make that available. So I'll skip over all the other jazz here about building the Angular app, and let's look at the plugins, and you can see here that I'm using the define plugin from Webpack to take the environment variable Netlify functions root and make that available to my Angular application as this token. Now Webpack's actually just going to do a hard replace of this token with this value, which is why I have to explicitly stringify it or otherwise quote it, which then makes it available to Angular. Now if we look at the Angular app, I'm using this in a service called signed URL service, and you can see here that I'm pulling this process env Netlify functions root and I'm casting it to a string to help TypeScript, and I'm just making that available as a module level variable. So this is now in my Angular application, and when Angular compiles via Webpack, again, this value here is being hard replaced with the value here. So it's going to do a compile time replacement of that value, making my Netlify functions root available here. It then becomes a matter of simply using the HTTP client to invoke off of that functions root my get signed URLs, which is the name of the Netlify function as based on the file name that defines the Netlify function. And here it is. I'm passing in that client file name and MIME type, which again we can see if we look down here at the network activity, we can see that client file name and MIME type being passed in. And at this point, I now have my Angular application has the ability to generate securely signed, pre-signed URLs that will make it available to post S3 files directly from the browser to S3. I'll just quickly take a look at how that happens. So this sign URL service is consumed by this upload service. You can see here we're using dependency injection. The upload service takes a file, gets the name and the MIME type of that file, calls the sign URL service, which in turn is going to be calling our Netlify function. I then send that file to S3 using the generated put URL. This is going to be using an XHR workflow. Now keep in mind, I pulled this XHR workflow essentially more or less from a Mozilla demonstration of how to upload files using XHR. This is not intended to be a robust upload. It simply works, and it seems to work in Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. I didn't even come close to testing it in IE. I have no idea. So take this with a grain of salt. This is just for the demo here. But what we can see, just the meat of this, is that I'm calling that get signed URLs Netlify function locally, getting the pre-signed URLs, uploading the file directly to S3 using the pre-signed put URL, and then I'm returning to the calling context the pre-signed get URL. That calling context is my root component, which you can see here offers that file input. When the file input is changed, I'm passing the files to this upload files function, which we can see here loops over the files, calls that upload service, passes in the file to that upload service, which again is calling the Netlify function, then putting the file directly from the browser to S3 using the pre-signed put URL. It then takes that response, pushes it onto our uploads response here, and then we're simply looping over the uploads and outputting the get URL, that pre-signed get URL, and the name of the file, which is of course what we see right here. And there you go. This is I don't know. This was pretty exciting. It took me a couple of days to get this working with some help of some excellent blog posts that I found along the way. And you can try this out for yourself. I will disable the demo shortly because hosting and sending files to S3 actually costs money. The Netlify functions are free. There is a free tier, I should say, that I think has like 100 and something thousand invocations or some number of hours, which is awesome. Just another reason why Netlify makes building applications super, super easy and exciting. And yeah, this was awesome. And I think just demonstrates how powerful Netlify is, especially the fact that it really encapsulates all of the building and packaging of this Lambda function, such that we don't have to deal with any of the hard work that goes into it.